As one of the most diverse cities in the country, it makes sense that Houston has a large percentage of minority-owned businesses. But one group leads the way in the rate of entrepreneurship, and that is Houston's Asian American community. The number of Asian-owned firms in the Bayou City exceeds state and national averages. Why are Asian businesses thriving here? What are their greatest challenges? And what are their hopes for the future? To help us answer these questions, we have Anna Pham, Director of Operations at Mai's Restaurant, Yagdeep Alawalia, Executive Director of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston, and Ben Yu, Chairman of the Asian Chamber of Commerce. I'm KHOU11 anchor reporter Shernmin Chow, and these are Cultural Conversations. So we're talking about businesses, and sort of traditionally the thought about Asian businesses that they've been fairly small family mom and pop operations. And Ben, I wanted to ask you though, kind of from a bigger perspective, what kind of impact do Asian American businesses have in the Houston area?
Yes, so from recent survey, you can see that in overall U.S. Asian-owned business, is more than 500,000 businesses are Asian-owned. And in Texas alone, 10% of them are in Texas. And the next number is interesting, the Houston area, Houston metro area, 19% of the minority-owned businesses are Asian-owned. And compared to 4% are Black-owned community and also 13% Hispanic-owned. So that's interesting, the 19%, that's a number probably surprised a lot of people are Asian-owned. They are highest number compared to any other minority business owners.
Which is pretty interesting since it's the smallest group, right? It's only about, we're maybe 6% in the Houston area. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Asian businesses are sort of overrepresented, if you will?
I think down to the tradition of Asian people, they just tend to be more entrepreneur, the generation after generation, and that they like to start their own business, and their entrepreneur spirit, that's pretty high across all the different Asian countries.
Okay, well, that's certainly true, Anna, for your family, right? You've had Mai's for 3 generations, Vietnamese refugee family, and you think you may have been among the first Vietnamese restaurants here in the Houston area?
That is correct.
So talk a little bit about that, introducing East to West. How was that sort of bringing a whole new taste sensation to Houston, Texas?
I think that for my grandparents, when they came here, it was trying to create a home for their family as refugees in a foreign country, not being able to speak the language, not being able to be familiar with the culture, and trying to make a comforting home for their own family. And so at first it was a sense of community, feeling like they wanted to belong to the Houston community, and they were able to connect with some of the other refugee families as well as be able to connect through religion, which was close by for the restaurant for us. And so through the years, one of the first things that my grandparents had to do was they knew that Chinese food was more familiar here in the States than it was with Vietnamese food. So they were able to offer buffet, which was what put Mai's on the map at first, was being able to offer a rendition of Asian cuisine that was a little bit more familiar.
Okay, start with what you know, branch out with what you may not. And Asians are sort of known for how important the family element is. How did that impact running a business? Maybe good, maybe bad?
Oh my gosh, my grandparents had 8 children and brought all 8 kids here to Houston, and everybody played a role in the restaurant. So, they were busboys, dishwashers, cooks. They are all self-taught and self-made. My mom was a server. She was also a chef. They were their own staff. And so that's what I think with any big family, everyone just kind of assumes your role and you kind of pick up. There's really no order. There was no handbook and a manual for them to work and base off of. They just kind of ran with it, and that was a means to an end for them. And it was a way for them to be able to make a living as well as continue to survive in the changes here.
A business so that all 8 family members could help get some income in.
Yeah, and nobody could speak any English. I mean, my mom was only 9 when she came here. And so it was not only just unfamiliar culture shock for them, but I mean, it was learning a whole new language and a whole new way of life, being able to have, accessibility to cars. They didn't have that.
Let's take a look at Asian-owned businesses by the numbers. Between 2007 and 2012, the number of U.S. businesses owned by Asian Americans rose 23.8% from 1.5 million to 1.9 million. In contrast, the total number of all U.S. firms increased by only 2% during that same period, from 27.1 million to 27.6 million. Based on these totals, 6.9% of all businesses were Asian-owned in 2012, up from 5.7% 5 years earlier. So let's talk a little bit bigger, Yagdeep. Let's look at sort of the broader global scale. Talk to us about Houston and South Asia. I know you're particularly familiar with India. What does business and trade look like?
It's been impacted, but I want to first bring into perspective an answer to your previous question, which basically was the impact that Indo-Americans or Asians have made on the local business. If you look around yourself, you will find that nearly 50% of all the hotels and motels are owned by Indo-Americans. A lot of the medical practices are managed by or run by doctors of Indian origin. And all of these businesses, big or small, have been impacted by the current pandemic, with hotel occupancy falling to as low as 10 or 15%. A lot of Asian restaurants, whether they are in the Hillcroft area, in Chinatown, or across Houston, were impacted by the whole COVID situation. But to come back to your question, trade has slowed down because, for example, a lot of our businessmen are in the energy trade. They're in the energy business. We have fairly large corporations owned by Indo-Americans that have been impacted. And with the shutdown on travel, for example, that impacts business. With the change in the oil price, with the gas price changing, the impact on the trade numbers has changed. So COVID has made a big difference in the lives of our people, the whole community at large, and it has made an impact on business.
You know, and let's talk about that more in a minute, but talk to me first about, you know, Indo-Americans, Indians have sort of been the most recent third wave, if you will, of Asian immigrants to the Texas area. Why is that? What has attracted this fairly large migration?
It's the business-friendly atmosphere of Texas. It's our low taxes. It's our large Indo-American community that makes people from India feel welcome. And it's the marketing, because the partnership has done a great job with the Chamber of promoting Houston as a destination. And when I mean Houston, I mean the whole neighborhood, Harris County, Fort Bend County, all our surrounding areas. We do an excellent job of presenting Houston as a to-go destination for inbound investment. So the numbers were about $10 billion recently of inbound investment, but that does not account for the small businesses. There are people who have invested in and are buying into local businesses. So there's a lot of inbound investment into our region because we are a business-friendly area.
As of 2012, California was home to more Asian-owned businesses than any other state in the U.S., with 604,870 businesses, followed by New York at 243,105, and Texas came in third with 155,784 businesses. There are a total of 45,013 Asian-owned businesses across Harris and Fort Bend counties. This represents 10.7% of the total businesses in the two counties. The majority of the Asian-owned entrepreneurial firms are located in Harris County with 36,178 companies. That represents 9.9% of businesses in the county. You pointed out, obviously, the problems that COVID has brought up. And then the other aspect of that, of course, has been the rise in AAPI crimes over the last year during COVID. Fortunately, most of those have been outside of the Houston area, but certainly we've seen some of that. In the very beginning, we know that Chinatown, Asiatown restaurants were being hard hit. So all of you, what have you seen during COVID? Has that impact lasted longer than just the outset of COVID? How has that affected your customer bases? Why don't you start us off, Ben?
Yeah, I think during the COVID, most, if not all, the service type companies got impacted. Restaurant first, they suffered the most, but also massage, tourist, entertainment, and also companies doing the distributors, they are impacted as well. And their struggle. I think the rebound, the business rebound that we're focusing now is it's much stronger than we thought. The business resilience is big.
That's good to hear. How about you, Anna? I mean, you're very customer based, obviously, with the restaurant. What did you see?
Well, for us, we've been fortunate enough to be on the outskirts, in the city of Houston. And so we're such a diverse city, and us being centrally located in Midtown, we are able to attract, like, it's a melting pot here in our establishment. So we didn't actually have any experience, although I am aware of the increase in the hate crime. I know that's not something that literally happened just during COVID alone. It's been something that's been prevalent in our communities. But again, for Mai's restaurant, and I can only speak for us, is that we didn't have any of that. We see so many different diverse cultures in our establishment. We've been lucky enough that our clients have been really respectful of that. And I see a lot of embracement. And if anything at all, I feel like for us, there was a lot more understanding, although I'm super sensitive about it because I'm aware that it does happen and, very close by establishments that have experienced that. And, unfortunately, I think it's just a misconception and it's misinformation that people are associating with the virus itself. But we have been okay for the most part during this time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that for you. Jagdeep, what about that internationally? Like, we had the shootings in Atlanta, right? With
Let
6
me bring
Asian
into
women close.
perspective the fact that when something happens, it's due to lack of education. So when 9/11 happened, the first two victims of hate crime were Sikhs. I'm a Sikh by faith. Unfortunately, the beard and the turban looks a little like what Osama bin Laden looked like. So the first two deaths after 9/11 were Sikhs who were killed by angry people. And this was due to lack of education. So what I feel is this whole lack of education of how the virus started was the reason for a lot of the hate rhetoric that came up. I'm glad that a lot of people stood up to try to rebut what was being said. But that was the unfortunate part. What I did notice was that our members responded in a very positive way. So several hotel and motel owners approached the chamber and asked us if we would like to check with the medical center if they would like free or discounted rooms. Their rooms were empty anyway, so they said this could be a service to the hospitals. If their staff doesn't want to go home carrying the virus, they were willing to offer discounted rates to the hospital system. Several of our restaurants, Arling's, a Indo-Chinese restaurant in Sugarland, and Madras Pavilion, who does our catering every year for the gala, they basically started sending food across to hospitals, and they ended up getting people to sponsor the food. So they pivoted in the circumstances, trying to turn a bad situation into a positive message of support for those frontline heroes at the hotels who were fighting, putting their lives on the line to save lives. So there's a lot of good that comes out of a situation like this. Mm-hmm. And we have found an upsurge in public generosity and goodwill that's emerged from this.
Let's talk about the future, folks, the next generation. And I want to start with you, Anna, because I know, will there be a fourth generation of Mai's? And you're doing something very different. You've kind of put the restaurant a little bit on the back burner to go to law school. How did the family take that? That's a less traditional kind of venue approach for.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it takes a lot of, honesty and recognizing that as a third generation successor, I am still first generation American here in the States. Wanting to continue my family's tradition was an honor that I continue to carry. And having children of my own is one that I wish that they can carry on as well. However, I'm, big proponent about following your dreams. And for me, I know that culturally, we are very resilient and we, in a sense, settle and accept things just the way they are. But for me, it's pivoting with change. And so I echo what was said in the sentiment that we have to continue to innovate. And here I am, I'm at a pivot point. I think this kind of turning point, especially with the establishment and how businesses turn in 2020, I think it was a awakening that there's so many more chances and opportunities out there for us. And I want to be able to show the next generation, which includes my children. I have 4, that honoring your family and honoring your culture is one thing, but also carve a path for yourself and answer to your true calling. And so being an advocate of justice is something that's always been deeply rooted in me. Seeing the injustice with my own eyes, with my own, family being immigrants and seeing them struggle, I know that it has really empowered me to want to use my voice so that I can build a platform and also continue to inspire not only my mom, because I know that the hardest battle for me was to be honest with her and tell her I was doing something different and that it was different in a good way. Like I was breaking a curse, I felt like, and also creating a new mold for the next generation. So, to answer your question, is there going to be a 4th generation? That's entirely up to my kids. If they decide that's what's in it for them, there's 4 of them, so hopefully one of them will. But if not, I don't know. Maybe I can continue to do both. I don't know if that's being extremely ambitious, but I think that there's so much the future can hold.
Okay. So what you're saying is you're not going to guilt your children into taking over the restaurant.
No, absolutely not. I think that I kind of felt that way, and I felt like I was almost divorcing my family by telling them that I was breaking away, doing something different, but I haven't. I'm clearly holding both sides, and still balancing. So yeah, I'm going to law school and I'm still trying to balance this restaurant and hold on to my family's legacy and hopefully be able to pass that torch on to one of my kids.
Ben, what are you seeing? What do you think is going to happen in the next generation of Asian American businesses in Houston?
I see in our chamber, there are a lot of more and more young generation, young entrepreneur join the chamber. It's very interesting. I think they bring in several aspects. Number one is innovation. Even the restaurant business, like my restaurant, they bring a lot of innovation to the customers, which is not traditional mom and pop shop do. And the innovation, I tell you, we have the little survey that the online services for the restaurant come from less than 20% before the COVID to more than 60%. And most of them are brought in by the younger generation, the younger entrepreneurs. That's what we saw them more and more happening now.
Because when we talk about the future, you shared a story with me, and it's been some years, but when you first arrived, you were looking to buy a business on the outskirts of Houston.
That was a very interesting situation. So I came to Houston and I took a course on accounting at the Houston Baptist University because I thought I'd be taking care of my own books of accounts. And I realized that was silly. Though I got A's in the subject, I realized you always have to hire a professional. I was talking to one of the professionals at the Houston Baptist University. He asked me how I felt in Houston, and I said I felt very welcome. I asked him how he felt about Indo-Americans, and he said, everybody I've met is either a doctor, an attorney, or an engineer, or well qualified. So he said, we have a very positive image of Asians, especially of Indo-Americans. Now, a few weeks later, I had hired a broker to help me identify a business I wanted to buy. We drove 100 miles outside Houston, and we landed up at this business. The broker had not revealed what I looked like, and the owner of the business was shocked to see me, and she asked us to leave and come back during lunch. We went back during lunch, and we had a conversation, and it turned out we had a common friend. So she mellowed down, and she told me, Jagdeep, the reason I had asked you to shoo away was A, my people would have known I'm selling, and B, which is more important, nobody who works for me would work for somebody who looks like you. And that was a big shock, because 2 weeks ago, I had heard that we were very welcome, we were very respected in Houston. And 100 miles outside Houston, the scenario was totally different. And again, it comes back to the point that those people were not educated about what we were, what we looked like. It reminds me of my first trip to America in 1982 when I visited Nebraska on a Rotary Group Study Exchange. And I was wearing a red turban in honor of the Big Red. And a lady stopped me in the street and said, "Your bandage is full of blood, you need to change it."
Oh, dear.
So it's all a question of education. So that's a reality we have to face.
I'm happy to say that was not recently, and I hope you have found things have changed in the intervening years.
We hope they have. And this was, as I said, 22 years ago, 23 years ago, a long time ago. And it was in a remote part of Houston, outside Houston. Houston's always been very friendly. It's a very diverse community. Everybody we met in Houston is very welcoming. And this is why we chose Houston, got here as fast as we could to live here.
So hopefully the next 22 years will bring even more positive changes. Well, thank you all for having joined us. Jagdeep Ahluwalia, Anna Pham, Ben Yu, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.